Nettles, President of the Chatham Community NAACP, and President of the Community Remembers Coalition Chatham. The grant program of the Community Remembers Coalition Chatham and the two Chatham NAACP branches, number 5377 and 5378, are glad you chose to join us. We believe you will find this evening discussion on While Justice Sleeps, written by Stacey Abram, enjoyable and educational. Although While Justice Sleeps is labeled as fiction and as such is meant to entertain, the novel also informs and enlightens. According to our presenters, the novel provoked observation and questions relevant to American politics today. Stacey Abram has written 8 romance novels under her pen name, Selena Montgomery, and 2 thriller novels, Rogue Justice, was just published this summer, and she has written 2 children's books. While Justice Sleeps is the first to be written under her own name. So please sit back, get comfortable, and don't forget to mute your device. By turning off your audio and video camera, it will reserve bandwidth. Thanks again for being here. At this time, Joe Coro will introduce our presenters.
Whether you've read While Justice Sleeps by Stacey Abrams, who's better known to us as a political activist and the first Black woman to be a candidate for governor in Georgia, this discussion will give you new insights into the significance of the book and entice you to read it, perhaps. It is my privilege to introduce our distinguished discussion leaders. Dr. Stella Horton, a native of Pittsboro, North Carolina, graduated from Horton High School. She attended St. Augustine's College in Raleigh and graduated from AT&T State University, magna cum laude, where she majored in education with a focus on history and government. She went on to receive both a master's and doctorate in education from Rutgers University. Dr. Horton has devoted her life to educating youth and has enjoyed a long, accomplished, and varied career. Known to us as Dell Turner, was born to Southern parents who migrated to New York. She was raised and educated in public and private schools and universities in both New York and North Carolina. She returned to Chatham County 32 years ago and has served in various capacities in rural and urban schools for over 27 years. She organized the first parent-focused program in Chatham in 1995 and served on the Chatham County Planning Board, the Chatham County Affordable Housing Task Force, the Partnership for Children, Housing Initiatives, and the Comprehensive Plan Task Force. She has been a member of the Board of Education since 2011. I will now turn the program over to Jan Cowell, a CRC-C member, who will be asking the questions of our presenters. Jan?
Okay, the first question, or first part of it anyway, is how would you define the protagonist Avery? In addition to Avery being the female protagonist, there is another female character, the Chief Justice Teresa Roseborough of the Supreme Court. Why do you think it was important for the author to show women in positions of leadership? In contrast, Avery's mother is not presented as a strong woman. Stella?
Well, thank you, Jan, and good afternoon, all. And also one correction, Joe, the university that I graduated from undergraduate work was A&T State University, not AT&T. Just a minor correction.
I missed a word, sorry.
Okay, one of the things that I want to elucidate prior to getting right into the question is Stacey Abrams, both of her parents were ministers. Her mother was a librarian, and she she has always indicated that her mother was her inspiration for writing. Additionally, she is the second of 6 children, and her siblings became a sounding board for this book. One sister, her youngest sister, Janine, works for the CDC and is a biologist. So Stacy would refer to some of her scientific questions, which the book is loaded with science, to have those scientific questions answered by her younger sister. Her other sister, Leslie, is a judge, so she would ask her questions such as, well, does a law clerk do X, Y, and Z? Because the protagonist in this book is a law clerk. So therefore, Leslie was the in-house researcher with knowledge. So that being said, I want to begin responding to the questions that Jan posed. How would I define Avery? I would define Avery as a brilliant young law clerk who plays her strengths and figures out who she can trust to ensure justice is done. The story begins when the Supreme Court Justice, who is Howard Wynn, falls into a coma right before the court is to consider a case involving a pharmaceutical merger. Avery was assigned by Judge Wynn as having power of attorney of all of his affairs. Avery was questioned by Major Vance, who was the FBI agent. And as you will see, this became a tension within the story because Avery actually has to go against Homeland Security FBI agent Vance, and eventually Avery has to go against the President of the United States. In Major Lance's questioning of Avery regarding her receiving power of attorney by Judge Wynn, he says, well, Avery, no, Ms. King, so you can understand our concern that you, as Justice Wynn's law clerk, holds his power of attorney. It would be easier for everyone if you would relinquish your position, allow Justice Wynn's wife to perform her duty of power of attorney, unless, Ms. King, you give a clearer explanation. We have every reason to suspect that this power of attorney document is a forgery. And this begins the challenge of Avery having to maneuver the powers that be. However, Avery's character is able to explain concepts and show how specific details affect the plot without overloading the reader. With as many twists and turns, and there are many, Avery never reveals too much or too little at any time. She has to be meticulous in her planning and research, including dealing with her drug-addicted mother, which makes the book even more thrilling because the dangers often feel real. Now, regarding the author showing women in positions of leadership, such as Justice Chief Roseborough, who supported Judge Wynn's decision regarding Avery, and Chief Justice Roseborough was one real character because she actually served in President Clinton's presidency. Avery was told by Vance, either you are going to change the power of attorney, and he was really nagging her. And Justice Chief Roseborough spoke up and said, listen, Vance, either you arrest her or leave her alone because you have no grounds to arrest her. Another thread in the book that shows Avery's genius was her conclusion and discovery reached in the research of genetic mapping, which gave a new meaning to like father, like son, with a chromosomal connection. Justice Wynne was widely expected to be the deciding voter in an international case involving GenWorks and United States, which included the establishment and discovery of a biogenic drug, which was supposed to be the cure for the disease that Judge Wynne had. Now, the merger of these two companies, and if you look in page 198, you will actually see a clear discussion of how the patent was to be a new gene therapy. However, President Stokes tried to stop it because President Stokes was objectional to genetic testing and stem cell research. So there was also tension between President Stokes and the Indian company because previously the Indian Parliament had refused to approve a trade deal that President Stokes had previously heavily promoted. Now, the Supreme Court was expected to issue a ruling in the collaboration of the two companies, GenWorks and Advar. The Supreme Court heard the case, and Justice Wynne, who is now in a coma, heard the arguments before he fell sick. It appeared Justice Wynne supported GenWorks, but with Justice Wynne in a coma, there is a split court, and the lower court ruling, which was not to approve the measure, would stand. So if that decision would stand, that meant President Stokes wins. And if Wynne does not pull through, Stokes doubly wins because now he has a seat to fill on the Supreme Court. Some of the other women to respond to the other part of the question asked, who appear in the story, who are in leadership positions, are Dr. Christina Greer, who is a renowned political scientist and judicial scholar, Dr. Elizabeth Papaleo, one-time chemist and current head of strategy, planning, and budget for the Science and Technology Directorate, and Camille, who is the assistant to FBA Agent Vance. Now, Jan, is there a second part of this question that you wanted to ask me?
Yeah, because Chinky gave me the name Guido, man.
Jan.
That's what he be saying. He be saying Guido.
Well,
Jan, can you unmute?
Sorry about that. Okay, try again. Do you think there is any deliberate action by the author to present gender balance in the book? Does gender balance exist in American politics today? Explain in what context it does or does not exist. How do you think Avery's struggles identified with Stacey's current and past political struggles?
Well, regarding gender and gender balance in the United States government, clearly, I think we all know that women are underrepresented. This actually suggests there's a potential pool of talent that is not being fully drawn upon. And therefore, valuable perspectives will be absent from the decision-making process. And according to research that I reviewed, in February of this year, a study was done which showed in the United States, only 30% of women served in political positions compared to 70% of men. So what the research then tends to suggest is that achieving gender equity requires more than women and men having an equal share of seats or positions. It requires that women and men of all backgrounds have equal access to such positions and can participate in decision-making on an equal basis. Achieving this means putting in place equal access to leadership roles and removing socioeconomic barriers to political participation. Now, if I were to compare Avery's struggle or struggles with Stacey's current and past political struggles, just look at how the hotly contested 2018 gubernatorial race in Atlanta drew national attention. There were allegations of voter suppression initiated by Kemp, who was Georgia's Secretary of State. Kemp's office, prior to the 2018 election, canceled over 1.4 million voter registrations. The voters were given no notice that they had been purged from the voting rolls. And needless to say, 75% of the voters who were purged belonged to people of color. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper, this may have represented the largest mass disenfranchisement in US history. Kemp oversaw the removals as Secretary of State and did so 8 months after he declared his candidacy for governor. Similarly, Avery had to deal with politicians on a different level, those who kidnapped her mother and threatened to kill her unless she used her guardianship of Justice Wynne to terminate his life support. Both Abrams and Avery had to deal with politicians who allowed justice to sleep. So in conclusion, I end on this note. Just enough people, I believe, in the United States are still honest enough to change and positively alter the culture of apathy, racial injustice, voter suppression, and the list goes on. Yes, it has been a rough road, but recognize the willingness of our young people. We have their voices and their strong desire to implement change. And I know in Chatham County, there is a fundamental decency of its people who will not allow justice to sleep. Thank you.
Del, the question for you is, what is the central theme of the narrative and how is it reflected in the actions of the characters?
Thank you and welcome everybody. So the tempting and pervasive nature of corruption stands out as the central theme of Stacey L. Abrams' compelling, timely novel. Using the ultimate power game of chess as a framework to symbolize the danger inherent in playing power games, Abrams explores through a moral and ethical lens how corruption in our political sphere has the potential to transform our national culture. Our own real Supreme Court, in fact, engages in sporadic internal arguments over whether the Constitution permits the government to exercise moral authority over individual members of society or demands the government be operated under mandates of moral and ethical relativism. This is a significant argument with momentous implications for us. Why? Well, because people generally think about morality and ethics as interchangeable. They are not. They differ slightly, even though the components of corruption they measure are the same. But morality is personal. It measures whether behavior conducted by individuals or society as a whole is right or wrong. Ethics, on the other hand, refers to a corporate determination of what is an appropriate or inappropriate action relative to that specific corporate function in society, e.g., justice, medicine, engineering, science. Ethics considers morality, but does not concretely label certain actions or behaviors as good or bad. So for the purpose of describing how the actions of key characters support the theme, I will employ labels the Supreme Court uses to distinguish and the causal motivations of the characters' actions. There's 6 terms, and they are moral relativism, which states that there is no universal set of moral principles. Rather, the principles are culturally defined. And I have to say this, historians believe that moral relativism based on culture is dangerous, as it leads to moral paralysis and indifference. Individual moral relativism is the idea that values vary from person to person, and each person has their own valid set of morals. There's no concept of correct moral principles. Everything is based on what an individual desires. Moral universalism refers to the idea of action acknowledged as good or right by all and applied to all. It's equated with the rule of law, which implies that every person, irrespective of station and without exception, is subject to the law. In this sense, it stands in contrast to tyranny or oligarchy, where the rulers are held above the law. Ethical universalism is a principle that considers the welfare and risks of all parties when considering policy decisions and outcomes. Ethical relativism, the opposite value, whether an action is right or wrong depends on the moral norms of the society in which it is practiced. The same action may be morally right in one society, but be morally wrong in another. Finally, ethical subjectivism is the idea that our moral opinions are based on our feelings, nothing more. This view asserts that there is no such thing as objective right or wrong. So Justice Howard Wynne, an ethical universalist, is portrayed as a brilliant yet cynical jurist, as well as a keen chess player. By virtue of his office, he has a doubly sworn ethical commitment to maintain and uphold his country's universal rule of law. His duty to expose the president's malfeasance honors that. However, his decision to provide an affirmative swing vote on a consequential merger before the Supreme Court is grounded purely in individual moral relativism, the desire to save his son. That decision causes Wynne to use fraud, deceit, secrecy, and coercion to influence his law clerk, Avery, to execute his plan, while he affects Tacoma to render him useless in helping her. President Brandon Stokes is an ethical subjectivist. Stokes' opposition to the merger Wynne supports is primarily to cover up his involvement in genocide from the public, thereby removing that obstacle to his reelection. Both men demonstrate how a lack of transparency and clinging to power can easily result in ethical and moral corruption and has a pervasive effect on others in their orbit. Avery Keene, the reluctant heroine of the narrative, is unwillingly drawn into, but later accedes to being put in a position of reducing her ethical universalism to individual moral relativism through her mentor, Justice Wynne. She represents how true loyalty to one thing means sacrificing a loyalty to another thing. Major Vance, unlike Avery, but much like his mentor, President Stokes, is also an ethical subjectivist driven by true loyalty, more to the office of the presidency than the person occupying it. He represents the tenuous line between loyalty and betrayal. Nigel Cooper and Dr. Indira Srinivasan, co-creators of the formula used to perpetrate genocide on unsuspecting Muslims, but which also has elements that, when modified, can allegedly cure the genetic disease Justice Wynn's son has inherited, exemplify both ethical and individual moral relativism. Nigel was driven by corporate greed, and Indira by a possible cure for her own rare arthritic disease, as well as the power and influence her company will gain if the proposed merger before the Supreme Court goes through. Dr. Anyi Kandahar Ramji, the other bishop besides Wynn in the Lasker Bauer chess scenario, where both bishops sacrificed in order to save the king, is an ethical universalist who represents the sacrifice of freedom whistleblowing entails. It is Anyi who first alerts Justice Wynn and provides written evidence of the president's role in genocide before he goes into permanent hiding. And last is Jared Wynn, son of Justice Wynn, and the only character without control over millions of lives. He's a key player in helping Avery decipher the cryptic chess-centric clues left by Justice Wynn. He wants to see the merger go through and the president exposed. However, he is also driven by self-interest, gaining a longer life.
You're muted, Jan.
Okay. Judge Wynn summoned his attorney Noah to change his will, which had previously been changed and torn up dozens of times. Noah expressed he did not understand Wynn's endgame. The judge responded by saying, "You can't possibly comprehend the machinery of justice and the length to which others will go to thwart it." Acknowledging While Justice Sleeps is a fictional thriller, does the story indicate the Supreme Court is fractured? How do you relate to what is currently happening within the most powerful court in the United States today that would demonstrate how the so-called machinery of justice is broken and the lengths to which the current Supreme Court justices are going to thwart the highest court in our land while justice sleeps?
Thank you, Jan. Noah, as stated, Justice Wynn's attorney, did not understand Judge Wynn's endgame. Noah had changed Justice Wynn's will, I think, more than 18 times. And legally, Justice Wynn could not change his will again if he showed signs of dementia. And that was a question. This is when Noah expressed to Justice Wynn, "I don't understand what you are doing." And of course, Judge Wynn retorted, "You can't possibly comprehend the lengths of which others will go to thwart justice." Judge Wynn goes on to say, "Therefore, you will do well to keep your mind focused on the small task I assign to you. Take my dictation, fancy it up with the words that will earn your $520 per hour, and then bring the documents to me for signature." A typical Judge Wynn. By this time, Noah wanted to tell Justice Wynn to go to hell, but the justice had increased Noah's monthly billable hours significantly in the last 6 months. It sort of tells us how interest in money can impact behavior. It was during this meeting that Judge Wynn executed a durable power of attorney and appointed his clerk, Avery King, with specific instructions. Either Avery agreed to serve as his guardian in all matters, or the privilege goes to his estranged wife, Celeste. Originally, the justice had designated his first wife the beneficiary. Then, when their son Jared was born, Wynn put his proceeds in trust. Next, he gave his wife's fortune to Jared. After this first wife died, Jared the son disclaimed his portion. Justice Wynn then cut his son off at the age of 11, leaving him to be raised by an aunt using his mother's money. However, as the story evolves, around the time Jared received a medical discharge from the Navy, Jared then became the beneficiary. And this is an important development in the story as it develops. This was, as I stated, about the 18th change in the will of Justice Wynn. Wynn also gave every group that lost a case in a decision where he dissented a financial amount because he thought the organizations that came before the Supreme Court had been robbed by the court. And if Jared died before the judge, the entire estate of Judge Wynn would be equally divided among the organizations in his will, with a substantial stipend to Avery, the executor. His wife was to inherit absolutely nothing. Now let's move to the second part of the question. Even though Abrams' work is a gripping, complex, plotted, fictional thriller set within the halls of the Supreme Court, there are many parallels to our current U.S. Supreme Court. The question is our current Supreme Court fractured? In this book, the young law clerk, Avery, finds herself embroiled in a shocking mystery crafted by one of the most prominent judges in America. Avery, the clerk, begins to unravel the mystery, and the book reveals a window into Abrams, the author's, political imagination. In real life, Abrams is a lawyer with extensive knowledge of our judicial system, its strengths and vulnerabilities, as well as loopholes. Abrams has proven herself an essential voice in practicing American democracy. In real life, she has weaved together policy analysis, voting rights, political leadership, social justice, and more. Similarly, Avery, I quote, begins to unravel the carefully constructed chess-like sequence of clues Wynn left behind for her. The real question is, do the current Supreme Court justices view their jobs as working for the people, or do they work for the billionaires who have paid for their luxury trips, tuitions, purchases of homes, and other gifts? It appears to me that the current justices in the highest court in the land are ethically challenged. It appears they are operating and making laws within a culture that has no perspective. Therefore, our current Supreme Court is in a crisis. Consider the reversal of rights that have recently occurred. The cutting down of Roe v. Wade, the rejection of affirmative action, voter suppression, loss of the zealous pursuit of the rule of law, and failure to render objective judgment, discrimination due to sexual orientation, and the list goes on. The Supreme Court justices continue to issue unpopular controversial decision in cases similarly to what Avery was dealt, wherein she was put on administrative leave by the Chief Justice because she was being framed due to an electronic transfer of $500,000 that was placed in her account from an offshore account, and she knew nothing about this. So in the book, Today's Reality, judges are not to accept hospitality at resource and out of the country. The same thing is true of the Supreme Court today. The judiciary of Congress does not have the history of rules in place. Therefore, ethics appears to be limited. Additionally, recusal has no presence. As I understand it, currently, the Judicial Committee in Congress is trying to restore some legitimacy to the conservative justices. Somebody has to establish accountability, transparency, and legitimacy in the functioning of the Supreme Court. So the question still remains, does justice sleeps in the United States Supreme Court? Keep in mind, Supreme Court justice, like other federal judges, are required to file annual financial disclosure reports, which ask them to list gifts received. However, the Supreme Court is not subject to a binding code of conduct that applies to lower court judges. This failure of ethics or code of conduct basically gives individual justices latitude to write and or not write and enforce or not enforce their own rules while justice sleeps. Thank you.
Okay. Del, I've got another question for you. What do you think is the underlying message of While Justice Sleeps? And what relevant questions does it raise for today's society?
I think the underlying message in the novel is summed up in comments by Justice Nguyen. He said, with the current crop of pundits, bureaucrats, and hired guns in charge, America was destined to repeat the cycles of intellectual torpor that toppled Rome and Greece and Mali and the Incas and every empire that stumbled into short-lived, debauched existence. The message I take from that is, if we don't establish safeguards against corruption among people and institutions that have access and influence over our lives, our culture will become one where, as Justice Nguyen put it, anything goes, or as the Supreme Court is considering, law governed by dominant culture. I think While Justice Sleeps is one of those great works like Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Grapes of Wrath, and 1984, all notable fictions that impacted society nationally and globally and provided catalysts for change in society. I also think that Stacey Abrams' choice to publish this particular title under her own name is not a coincidence. Rather, it's a 21st century wake-up call. The novel invokes memories of moral and ethical abuses of power I've witnessed in our own recent past and present, including Watergate, Vietnam, Iran-Contra, the Whitewater scandal, the Iraq War, and of course, January 6, 2021. Those incidents, just like the one in the story, are part of the same soup, just made with different bones. The common thread is that they all involve presidential abuse of power. Although we don't know what happened with President Stokes, we do know that 3 of the 4 presidents impeached throughout our nation's history were involved in the incidents I just referenced, yet none were held fully accountable. Nixon was allowed to resign. Clinton was not moved removed from office, and Donald Trump was tried but exonerated. Reagan was never impeached, nor was there any talk of doing so because he scapegoated Oliver North instead, just like President Stokes assigned culpability for the genocide of Muslims in India to Major Vance. So essentially, despite the fact that our president's abuses directly affected our core economic stability, cast us into wars without just cause at the expense of thousands of lives, threatened our environment and public health, and model corrupt behavior for our children, we silently, casually allowed them to be placed above the law. And to add insult to injury, we pay millions of dollars a year for each of them after they leave office. The complacency we appear to have developed about abuses of power is disturbing. More than that, however, it is causing a dangerous and increasing conformity bias in our country. Conformity bias causes people to behave like those around them, particularly mimicking persons in positions of power and influence. While it may be arguable that occurrences of corruption are commonplace, if nobody is willing to do something about it, it becomes a habit that eventually morphs into moral relativism. And just like that, our entire culture is transformed through private and public policies, arbitrary legislation, and court opinions. We saw conformity bias in action when during the COVID crisis, Trump's anti-vaccination views and disdain for wearing masks, according to the National Library of Medicine, influenced at least 7% more of Americans to resist vaccination. We saw it again when the majority of senators voted to exonerate Donald Trump of proven charges simply on the basis of party ideology, and yet again very viscerally on January 6, 2021, when Trump influenced a reasonably large contingent of anarchists to descend on the nation's capital and physically threaten legislators and assault police. Stacey Abrams' tale only alludes to the general society in terms of their ability to vote Stokes out of office, and it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Nonetheless, it raises several critical questions about our own real-time government, at least for me. Some of them are, why aren't we using means available to us within the bounds of established law, but beyond the traditional remedy of elections, to amend Articles 1, 2, and 3 in the Constitution, to establish higher standards of ethics and outlaw the use of ideology in decision-making? The articles are 200 plus years old and need to be updated, not by the legislature, but by we the people. Number two, why must taxpayers pay the bill for subsidizing ex-presidents once they leave office, especially when their celebrity as ex-presidents more than not assures them a continuing income? And number three, are lifetime appointments to the Supreme Court really viable or necessary at this point in history? Senator Elizabeth Warren is currently on a crusade to interpose a code of ethics on the current Supreme Court, the only public body that has none. Stacey Abrams' commentary on the nature of corruption reminds us that once democracy ends in America, it's not coming back. This grand experiment in representative government will be over and will most likely be replaced by an American-style Reich with loyalists controlling all public and private levers of power.
Since we have a few minutes, I have a question for Stella. As she begins to grapple with her role as legal guardian, Avery meets Justice Wynn's son, Jared, and also contends that her own relationship with her mother. How do family dynamics play a role in the novel?
Okay, family dynamics. I will provide two examples, one addressing Jared and the other addressing Avery, that to me demonstrates and articulates the dynamics operating within their families. if you recall in my response to the second question, I'm sorry, the first question, in which the two companies that were coming together, and Judge Wynn's first wife died, and the son, Jared, actually went to live with the aunt. Jared had no contact with his father, Judge Wynn, for more than 15 years. As a matter of fact, Judge Wynn, when he found out he had this disease, Judge Wynn actually contacted his son and told him to get in touch with Avery. So Avery first met Jared with a knife in her pocket and her thumb resting on the release, because she didn't know why this son, who had no contact with his father, wanted to deal with her. And she was already under the pressure being exerted by Vance. Jared thanked Avery for not stabbing him at this meeting. And remember, Jared was the one who requested the meeting. And Avery had no idea why the meeting was going to be held. So she impatiently asked Jared, well, what do you want? And Jared reluctantly told Avery he hadn't spoken to his father in more than 20 years. And because his dad had sent him away to his aunt and refused to see him, it was never easy for him to talk about his family, and his bitterness actually turned into resignation. His mother died, and this is what he's telling Avery. His mother died, and the day after the funeral, the judge took Jared to live with his aunt, and he never came back. So Avery asked Jared, so why do you think that was so? And to talk about the dynamics within a family, Jared's verbalization was, he felt his father was just selfish, a cold man, and didn't want the responsibility of raising a child. With his mother gone, Jared believed that he did not have any practical purpose for his dad, because his dad had at that time just been released also as being a judge appointed. So Avery asked, did he make attempts to see his father? His response was, every year he snuck down to the court hoping to see his father until he turned 18 years old. He finally realized that his father would never be a part of his life. He joined the Navy, and there Jared found out that he had a birth defect that he had inherited from his father. Now, surprisingly, after Jared met with Avery, Avery was on her way home, and her drug addicted mom, Rita, had met her at her door, and Rita had never been in Avery's apartment, and it was obvious that she was high. And Rita said to her mother, you know, what do you want? And the mother said, well, I want to go inside, you know, maybe you can fix me dinner. I need to take a shower. And Avery refused to open the door for her mother because she felt that if she did, she would be cleaned out by the weekend, because her mother would steal from her. Avery realized she was rejecting this pitiful woman who had given her life. So she finally said, Rita, go away. And when she said that, Rita slapped her daughter across the face. Avery froze. Rita tried to hug her daughter with tears running down her cheeks. Avery felt so sadly about the situation that she did hug her. As she wrapped her in her arms, she buried her face in her rancid, unwashed hair, feeling despair. And it was at that time that Avery said that she realized a lifetime of carefully plotting escapes from this woman who was her mother. She never had been able to shake her. And then Avery's thoughts went to if she only was Jared. But you know, Avery and Jared had similar family situations. They both had a parent that had died. And Avery just wanted her mom to go away. And in this same situation, her mom became irate even after she slapped Avery and told Avery, I'm going to come to your job and let the people that you work with really find out who you are. And Avery said to her, what do you want? And her mother said, you know, do you have any money? So Avery said, I just have $20. The mother said, no, I need at least 100. So Avery ended up giving her mother $80. And the mother said to her daughter at that time, I hope you get a daughter just like you one day, a frigid bitch who thinks she's too good for me. Avery said nothing except under her breath, goodbye, Rita. This was a sample of the description of the family dynamics. Avery's mother was white, her father was Black. However, as the story evolved, things did change for Avery and also for Jared. But I will end here and hope those of you who have not read the book, that you will read it.
Del, if you were in Avery's shoes, would you have accepted the role of legal guardian? Why or why not?
If I were in Avery's shoes with my own mind or hers. If I were in Avery's shoes, and I knew all the facts. I knew that he was sick, but he wasn't gonna die. So therefore he would be able to vote. But I knew he also couldn't be the one to present this evidence. I don't think I would. I don't think I would because, and I thought about that question while I was reading the book, if I would, because she had a loyalty to the law. And that was the most important thing. That's how she got where she was in the first place. So I think the situation could have been handled another way, that it didn't have to be Avery that did it. It could have been somebody else who had enough respect in the nation that they would have been believed. I think that person could have I would have shared all the facts with that person and also made him understand that that formula that was developed by those two companies, which had this dual opposite purpose, would also help a lot of people that had rare diseases as well. It wouldn't just cure just that one. So for the merger to go through, it would have been important for me for the merger to go through just so that the greater good could be served too. So yeah, no, I wouldn't have done it myself as a law clerk, but I would have made sure that it did get done by somebody who had the reputation and the gravitas to get it done.
Now we'll hear from Mary as she tells us about what's next.
Well, thank you, Ms. Joe Coro. Thank you again for joining us this evening. We hope you have been inspired by tonight's very powerful discussion and you will want to read the novel. We will be taking a vacation the month of August, but you will be receiving an invitation in August to join us on our very exciting Pittsburgh Black History Bus Tour on September the 16th, 2023, from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Please join us in October for an event honoring a remarkable Northwood High School Charger football team. The team won the 1971 Central Tar Heel Conference Football Championship. Our program will be by Zoom. You will be receiving an invitation to join us for this meaningful event. We invite you to become a member of the CRC-C by going to our website, crc-c.org, and look for the Join Us section. We are looking forward to welcoming you to our group. Before closing, I would like to give special thanks to our guest, Dr. Stella Horton, School Board of Education Representative Delcina Turner, moderator, Ms. Jan Kowal, and special thanks to Joe Coro for the IT support and introduction. Finally, thanks again to each one of you for being here this evening. Have a wonderful and safe week.